Hello, I'm Mantastic'c and Fantastic, and today I want to talk about the new 10 Magic Stone 8-Star Fest exclusive Celebration Godfest that has just gone live in North America. So, we know for a certain fact that there is going to be a 20 Magic Stone Super Godfest coming up in the near future. When is that exactly? Soon is the answer. But that 20 stone event is going to feature only 7 or 8 star Godfest exclusives. And while the price tag per pull is high, you're guaranteed to get at least a 7-star Godfest exclusive, which is pretty magical and oftentimes the goal of rolling in Godfest. But with that being said, this 10 Magic Stone event is actually much better than I thought it would be, simply because the rolling rates are much higher than I expected. It is a seasonal-ish Super Godfest in the sense that there are some seasonal cards featured, and you have New Year's Reach, Beach Mariel, and Halloween Chacule all available at 2% each, which is not bad at all. You also have the new 8-star Godfest exclusive, which I'll talk about momentarily. We have the 7-star Godfest exclusive 6 stars. We have a seasonal A10 as well. And if you add up all of those together, you have a 40.5% chance of getting something that I consider valuable. I always consider Godfest exclusives helpful because at least at the worst, they are trade fodder, even if it's a 6-star one. And the seasonal New Year's A10, well, I don't have one, so it's obviously an enticing aspect in this event. And again, the 9-star seasonals are difficult to acquire. They are valuable. If you do roll one, you're going to obviously be quite happy. So the rolling rates are quite high. And in addition to all of the rare machine possible cards we can get, if you roll the 10 draw or the 4 draw, not only do you get to own that card, which is a valuable card to actually own, you will also be given not bonus rolls like you were beforehand. Instead of bonus rolls, you get to roll a bunch of huge gems. Let me double check to make sure it is huge giant gems. Like, I don't understand, the names don't make sense sometimes. So giant gem is the biggest gem currently. So getting the rem draws will give yourself many of those giant gems, which will save you a ton of farming. So that is nice. And at the same time, the 4 draw and 10 draw, I honestly think are good cards. So they're actually great weapon assists to own. So rolling them and getting some extra zest out of it is a nice thing overall. So I do think this Godfest is definitely worth potentially rolling in. Like, it does have nice stuff. But again, if you are being patient, you are okay with saving up, the 20 Magic Stone will probably be better value overall. But this is still not a bad thing overall. Now, while this Godfest is pretty good, I want to talk about the new 8-star Godfest exclusives that are now available, because we are actually given a medal or an exchange option through the Monster Exchange to actually acquire these cards directly. So in theory, you don't have to roll Raffine, you don't have to roll Alexander. So that is quite interesting overall if you think about it, because you can acquire arguably some of the better cards in the game just by Monster Exchanging, which I do think is great. But with that being said, do not Monster Exchange for any card if you don't have a dedicated use for them. You might pull one of them in the future, and if that was the one you traded for on a whim, you're going to be a little sad because duplicates may not necessarily be what you want to have. I would much rather have one of each copy as opposed to 2 copies of a single one of them. So if you don't have a good dedicated place to use them right now, just hold and wait, especially if you're planning to roll heavily in this Godfest or the future 20 Magic Stone Godfest, because there's a chance you might actually roll those cards. So I think a good option is wait and see unless you have a good use for it right now. So for Raffine, they are a multi-step transforming card. So 15 turns to transform initially, and they also make a spinner alongside of this transformation aspect. Cool. And then in their second transform state, this is where it could get a little bit dicey if you're using them as a leader. As a sub, it's okay if subs transform a little later. But to transform a second time, you need a 15-turn cooldown. That is an exceptionally long cooldown. Yes, it was 15 turns to transform initially, but 15 turns again is hard because all those skill boosts you loaded up with don't actually have any effect. But on the bright side, they do have a skill charge, which does at least lower this down to potentially 8 turns. But you have to be mindful of the fact that with a 15-turn cooldown, you will not benefit as much from hastes. Delays will work assuming you don't actually kill the opposing spawn in question. And if they are leaders, you probably won't kill them if you're matching all 5 colors to trigger that skill charge anyways. In theory, if you don't match those hearts, you won't get as much damage. If you have a delay up, you're able to at least do this in a safer manner. But tanking hits in this this mediocre mid-transform state is going to be problematic with only 8.16 times effective health. But once you do transform for the final time, you are actually an incredible leader and also an amazing sub for the Artist Atelier card. Now, if this ever will load to the next screen, there we go. So, in their final form, they have monstrous amounts of personal damage. They have 4 times 4 attribute awakenings and a god killer. So easy time capping on their main attribute. Sub attribute will actually be dealing a meaningful amount of damage as well. They have guard break, which could be situationally helpful. They lost the skill charge, but that's okay because their cooldown is a 3-turn cooldown. And this 3-turn cooldown is loopable with just 1 copy. And the reason for that is because it creates a single spinner that changes every second for 4 turns. So you always have this spinner on for 4 turns, and even if you get delayed by 1, you still could put it up again, but if you don't get delayed, you have 100% uptime. And in addition to the spinner, you have 4 turns of 2 times orb movement time, and movement time is the best way to take advantage of spinners. And then for 4 turns, 2 times attack for all subs. That's a meaningful attack buff, and this attack buff does stack with other buffs out there because it's only buffing the sub damage. You can give yourself an attack buff that helps everyone else, and this will stack in on itself. And this is a great way for you to layer in extra damage for your subs so they can actually deal meaningful amounts of damage. Just be mindful of the fact that this sub buff does not overwrite attack debuffs that are just given out by opposing spawns. So you will need something that could overwrite attack debuffs if that is of interest to yourself. And this spinner generation that has permanent uptime, bonus damage for subs, and the huge amount of doubling your movement time makes them a great sub for Ateli, because Ateli is playing on 7x6. They have to match TPAs of every kind of color basically, and every TPA you match increases their damage multiplier. And with the spinner, with the copious amounts of movement time, it allows you to actually fish out the orbs necessary to actually make those TPAs to give yourself that huge amount of damage bonus overall. So Raffine is an amazing best in slot sub for Ateli teams just for that reason. You have guaranteed orb generation. You're always going to have all 6 elements on the board, especially with that extra movement time to fish those orbs out. You're going to have a great time. But if you don't roll her and you actually want to use them as a leader, they're actually an incredibly strong leader in themselves. Remember, they're probably going to do meaningful amounts of damage, so this sub buff is great because your subs are probably the things that are not going to hit as hard. Remember, transforming cards cannot take double damage cap or 1.5 times damage cap latents. And then if we look at their leader skill, you need to match 6 or more elements, and you have to use devil types. So 6 or more elements should be definitely feasible. You have this spinner, you can spin out any orbs you need, and you don't have to worry about TPAs. So matching just those 6 is going to be quite easy, and you get lots of bonus combos with dual leaders, so hitting 10 combos will be no problem. If you think about it, you match all 6 elements, that's 6 combos, and dual leaders is plus 6 combos. You just hit 12 combos and massive amounts of auto follow attack. You just want to match 6 elements, and that's all you need to do, and you do wonderful amounts of damage, and you're incredibly tanky. Anytime a leader has 16 times effective health, you know they are going to be a strong option overall, because the benchmark, at least in my opinion, for at least getting feasible amounts of effective health is 11.11 times. That's like Blackbird Daytona levels. That is kind of the lowest you really can go at this point in time, I feel. So when you have 16 times effective health, you're bulky. You can tank large amounts of hits that you normally couldn't have. And the best part is, because your damage reduction is all of your effective health, you have no health multiplier, RCV debuffs are not as painful. It's quite easy to heal up when you have 1 times health and 1 times RCV. Even if your RCV gets halved, it's not too big of a deal to come back up. You don't need a healing solution. And anytime you have large gravities or bosses changing your health to a certain amount, like say bosses that fix your team's health at 100,000. Well, if you're a Seawolf team, you just lost most of your bulk. Raffine teams probably gained bulk because they probably wouldn't have hit 100,000 health anyways. So it's nice and when your leader skill is shifted heavily to damage reduction aspect, because you're much more likely to survive problematic mechanics at this point in time. So it's a wonderfully strong leader. They are just as powerful as Ateli in theory, potentially. Like, they can clear all levels of content available at this point in time. And the double restriction does throw in a bit of hindrances. You can't use every single card you would necessarily want to use. You also cannot asymmetrically pair with Ateli. And you're going to be playing on 6x5, but that's okay. With that spinner, you can fish out orbs anyways. And if you don't have Raffine and you don't want to trade it because you're uncertain whether or not Rainbow is going to be your dream aspect overall, if you have a New Year's Reach, they are a viable alternative pairing. have a New Year's Reach, because remember, this active skill has 100% uptime anyway, so in theory you don't really need two of them. And with New Year's Reach pairing, New Year's Reach does have a wonderful active skill. You need to have 7 turns of color and damage absorption cancellation. Well, you got it. And in addition to the 4 skill charges, you have nearly 100% uptime on damage and color absorption cancellation. That is pretty wild and magical overall when you really think about it. So it does give you that edge there because you never have to worry about those mechanics. New Year's Reach does do large amounts of damage with 777 combo and a 5 attribute awakening. Remember, a 5 attribute awakening is 4.5 times personal damage. So you can almost look at it as like 777 with basically a 10 combo. Huge amounts of personal damage. 8 times 4.5, that's 32, plus another half, that is 36 times personal damage. Pretty solid overall with a reasonably high attack stat. New Year's Reach will be dealing meaningful amounts of damage. And the leader skill, while it doesn't have bonus combos or auto follow attack, Raffine does that anyways, so you already have those aspects covered. New Year's Reach just gives a modest amount of bulk. It does give you actually a large amount of movement time. And in theory, this plus 5 seconds of movement time in conjunction with the doubling with the spinners means you have a stupendous amount of movement time. Just New Year's Reach and Raffine, you have 5 seconds base. You have another 5 seconds with the leader skill, that's 10. You have another 1 second with Raffine. If none of your cards have a time extend, you already have 22 seconds of movement time when you use Raffine's final form. Pretty magical overall. As a weapon assist, they're not that great. I honestly don't feel like their weapon assist is something that you would really want to be pursuing unless you have dupes. But then again, you don't want to really have dupes because you should be ideally waiting to trade after you roll heavily in either this Godfest or the 20 Magic Stone. That's kind of like the time frame when I would probably trade, at least for myself. And now we're going to look at Alexander. And Alexander is still a strong and meaningful card. It's just that they don't fit in as well on certain teams potentially, but they are still a reasonably strong leader in their own right. They don't have this multi-step transforming aspect that Raffine had, so they're a little bit easier to get going, assuming you can have 30 skill boosts right away or 30 effective skill boosts. And then when you do transform, he has an interesting mechanic. So first transform, you're fully ready to go. Like you have a real leader skill. You have 16 times effective health. We know this is great. And you have 9 times health and 1 times RCV. So this is where it gets a little bit problematic. You need to run a healing solution. If you don't have a healing solution, I don't know how you're going to be able to actually heal up to a meaningful amount. And while their active skill does provide a little bit of an RCV buff, 1.5 times RCV is not going to be sufficient when you have 9 times health. So you need to have something with an enhanced hard orb in order to make sure, you actually heal back up. So that is a little bit of a detriment. In terms of their awakenings, they have the 5 attribute 4 times. So massive amounts of personal damage on main and sub attribute, and a cross awakening to get rid of those sticky blinds because no one enjoys those. And then when you have dual Alexanders, you have a 2-turn cooldown, which means you can use 1 every single turn. And when you do so, you get a full board of all 6 elements, so you're guaranteed activation for all your rainbow needs, and you give yourself an RCV buff and then change to another form. And when we change to the other form, it's kind of cool. You change the colors around, so that means you must make sure all your subs, have all the right colors at least, because you're going to be swapping back and forth. You don't want to be, missing a color. And you have the exact same awakenings, and the active skill changes to the same 6 elemental board, but instead of an RCV buff, you get an attack buff. So this is great. You have an RCV buff and attack buff solved. All you need is a movement time buffer, and then you're good to go. So it's pretty cool. I like the idea of swapping back and forth. You get an attack buff or an RCV buff, and it is an interesting mechanic overall, and it will let you at least be able to tackle a bit more content in the sense that you have a bit more flexibility in team building because you don't need to bring a dedicated RCV buffer or a dedicated attack buffer. And then the leader skill is the exact same idea where it's 9 times of health and 43.75% damage reduction for the same beautiful 16 times effective health. And then the way they play is that you need to match 5 or more colors, and their active skill will guarantee you that as long as you didn't have any locked orbs, you're guaranteed to have at least all 5 colors present on a given board, which makes your life much easier. You have to use God type cards, so there's a bit more restriction there. The Devil typing had quite a few options available. I think the God typing is a little more restrictive overall. But you get auto follow attack, you get a little bit of bonus combos. They are a strong leader overall. They do have bulk, they do have consistent activation, they do have RCB, they do have attack buffing. They are a strong leader, but like they don't keep abreast of Atelli or Raffine because they just have a better sub pool. Atelli just has a bigger board, and they just have better support overall. Because remember, with Alexander, you cannot use Raffine, like they are a devil, so you're not going to be happy. It's not going to change here. I don't know why, but like it's devil bounce, so you just can't use them as a sub. And Atelli is also the wrong typing as well, so it's just not going to actually pan out for Alexander to use these other strong rainbow option cards. But on the bright side, their weapon assist is actually pretty cool. And at least for myself, if I were to roll him, I probably won't utilize him as a leader as much. I feel like I have stronger leader or easier leader options available. But this weapon assist is quite spicy. You get a single skill boost, a single team HP, and one enhanced orb of every color. Now, that means every team can, in theory, take advantage of this weapon assist to a certain extent, just from the Awakening's point of view, because basically every single team is going to have an orb changer of some kind, so changing those enhanced orbs into your desired color retains that enhancement aspect. So, like, it's a nice little passive damage that's universal for every team, which is pretty cool. But in addition to the nice Awakenings, the active skill is pretty great. You get a 4-turn delay along with 2 turns of damage and color absorption cancellation. So it's solving multiple problems at the same time. And that means you could use it at the very beginning of the dungeon when you first enter, assuming you have a card of a low enough base cooldown. And 20 turns is definitely quite long, but on the bright side, you might be able to utilize things with skill charge in order to hasten this up much quicker in order to have access to this powerful active skill. The reason I say that is because you could use the delay at the beginning of the dungeon to get yourself going and you're all happy, and then your skill charging is up very quickly if possible, and then it's ready for the damage absorption needs later on, or the color absorption needs, or a delay later on. A good thing I can think of is, like, say, Shura 3. Shura 3, you want a delay at the beginning, most likely to help yourself transform. You manage to do this successfully, and then there's going to be a damage absorption spawn you know that's going to happen on floor 6, if I'm not mistaken. So if you charge it up by then, great. In addition to that, if you don't need the damage absorption because you have other ways to solve it, if you have the delay ready, you can delay Parvati or Minerva. And that's a big deal because after the rem draws that appear on floor 7, you get leader swapped. And that could be problematic. And then when you go into Parvati, especially who voids your RCV, you can delay them. You can get back to your original leader. Life is just safer in that aspect. So I definitely feel like this weapon assist has great value, especially on rainbow-based teams where you can, like, at least utilize skill charge to hasten this back up in order to, gain access to this powerful active skill once again. So, with that being said, both Alexander and Raffine are strong cards overall. Raffine, I feel like, has a bit more value as a sub/leader at this point in time, but Alexander has a stronger weapon assist. But in that same breath, if you don't have a dedicated use for that given card, you don't know how you could take advantage of them, you don't have a good place to slot them in, I would just wait. Especially if you're planning to roll heavily in the upcoming 20-stone Magic Godfest or the current seasonal-ish Super Godfest. If you're planning to roll heavily in those events, you might roll them and then you want a monster exchange for the other one, because I would much rather have one of each as opposed to 2 of the same one. With that being said, let me know what you think about these cards in the comments down below, along with the current seasonal-ish Super Godfest. Do you think it's worth rolling it? And if you did roll in it, was it a fruitful venture? Regardless of all that, hopefully you all have a truly fantastic day. I wish you all the best luck in your own pad adventures, and happy puzzling.